Good evening. Would like to call the Rutherford County Board of Education special called meeting to order May 10th, 2022. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance led by Mr. Tim Holden.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. I would like to invite everybody to join me in a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Next item is the TSBA selection of finalists for Director of Schools, and I'd like to ask Ms. Tammy Grissom to come and speak with us.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson and members of the board. If you don't mind, will you pass those out? I'll have about 3 extra ones of the media and you.
And I always do that. I say Miss, but it's Dr. Grissom. Excuse me.
No problem. You can call me Miss, Tammy, whatever. We've prepared notebooks for each of you. Inside of the notebook will be the finalists that we are recommending, and there'll be some other items that I'd like to discuss with the board. But while she's passing those out for me, thank you very much. We had 7 applications, and our job as your search firm was to review the application and select the candidates that best met the criteria that the board adopted. Our job was also to try to recruit candidates as well to the position. I think most of you know that much like our teacher shortage, there's not overabundance of candidates wanting to be superintendent. That's a nationwide problem. But we do have some excellent applications, and we are ready now. If everyone could turn in their notebook, and we're going to start with going through the finalists first. So if you'll turn to tab 1 of your notebook, the first finalist that we are recommending is Dr. Andrea Anthony. She is currently your Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and Support Services, and she has been since 2017. Former Coordinator of Secondary Education in Rutherford County from 2015 to 2017. Former Executive Principal in Williamson County from 2003 to 2015. Former Assistant Principal and Director of K-12 and Summer Schools in Rutherford County from 1997 to 2003, a former math teacher in Rutherford County from 1993 to 1997, a former adjunct professor with MTSU from 2005 to 2011. Dr. Anthony has a total of 4 years as a teacher, 6 years as assistant principal, 12 years as a principal, 7 years in the central office, 5 years as assistant superintendent. She has a doctorate of jurisprudence and a doctorate in education administration. That is the first finalist, Dr. Andrea Anthony. Behind tab 1, you'll find her cover letter, her resume and references. I've also provided to the chairman, she has those. We provided all applications to the board. Those are your files of all 7 applicants. In each of those files, it'll have each candidate's transcripts and other items that we just did not put in the notebook, but they're in the folders. Behind tab 2 is your second finalist, Dr. John Ash. He's currently the principal of your Central Magnet School and has been since 2009. He's the former principal of Christiana Middle School from 2003 to 2009, former assistant principal of Laverne High School from 1999 to 2002, former teacher at Laverne High School from 1997 to 1999, former teacher at Brentwood High School from 1990 to 1997, former Tennessee Tech University professor from 1989 to 1990, former teacher at Smith County High School from 1988 to 1989, former MTSU adjunct professor from 2012 to 2014. Dr. Ash has a total of 32 years as a teacher, 3 years as an assistant principal, 18 years as principal, and he has a doctorate in educational leadership. His information is behind tab 2, Dr. John Ash. Behind tab 3 is Dr. James Sullivan. He's currently your Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction and has been since 2019. Currently, you're an adjunct professor at Lipscomb University and has been since 2015. Former principal at Rocky Ford Middle School from 2017 to 2019. Former Tennessee Ready Ambassador for the State Department of Education from 2018 to 2019. Former principal at Harris Middle School in Bedford County from 2012 to 2017. Former adjunct professor at MTSU from 2017 to 2019. And he's had several positions with the State Department as a reviewer for Ten Ready. He's been on the Ayers Institute Advisory Board and a board member of the Tennessee Association of Middle Schools. He's former assistant principal at Harris Middle in Bedford County from 2011 to 2012, and a former teacher at Blackman Middle School from 2006 to 2011. Dr. Sullivan has a total of 5 years as a teacher, 1 year as assistant principal, 7 years as principal, 3 years in the central office, and 3 years assistant superintendent. He has a doctorate in learning, organizations, and strategic change. Dr. James Sullivan. That is our recommendation for finalists. Chairman Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Grissom. Does anybody have any questions?
Well,
Dr.
this is
Grissom.
my first time to do this. I understand you brought us 3. If we wanted, could we look at some of the other candidates that submitted, or is this?
Oh, absolutely. I brought you all applications.
Okay.
So that is totally up to the board. You asked us to screen and provide the candidates that we thought best met your criteria, and we feel like we've done that. But as I mentioned, there are excellent applications, all with different strengths and weaknesses, but we tried to match the applicants that best met the criteria that this board adopted.
Dr. Grissom, can you give us a little feedback on, you said you worked on recruiting with some of your connections throughout
Did some recruiting. The salary was a little issue, was a little too low for a system this large. That was some of the issues with some of the candidates. And just after review and some of the candidates getting back, they just decided for various reasons not to submit their materials for this position at this time.
Can you tell us about how many? Ballpark?
Probably 4 to 5 other candidates.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No. They did not submit an application. I was just on the phone with them, so.
That was part of the recruiting process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did our fast growth, because we are one of the fastest growing counties, did that seem to kind of scare them? Were they worried about, the fact that, we're growing so fast? I'm just
I
curious.
don't know that they didn't say worried. You are one of the largest, I think you're the 4th largest district, and you are probably one of the fastest growing. So no one said that, specifically. Yeah.
Or the money, as far as the money issue, even after we repurposed the position and gave them a range, it was still a little bit low.
Yeah, for one particular person, they were already making 250 something. Yeah.
Any other questions for Dr. Grissom? Okay, we appreciate all that you've done for us to this point. So can you walk us through, guide us through? And I know Mr. Evans, we've asked him to put out a survey to our families on questions that they may want us to ask as we go through an interview process. So we might talk a little.
If you will look inside of your notebook to the pocket, and I don't think your attorney passed it out as well. I emailed you a copy of the sample interview guide, and I've also provided a copy for you. These are questions that are directly tied to your criteria. You do not have to use them, but they're here if you choose to. All I ask is when you start the interview process is, Chairman Johnson, I would assign or let board members sign up. Each board member needs to ask a particular question and ask the same question for each of the interviews. So if Tammy is always criteria number 2, she does that for each of the interviews to keep some consistency. And then you don't need to change the questions, after each interview. Use the same set of questions for all 3 or ever how many you decide to interview. And then I would say once, I know on the timeline, Chairman Johnson, you all had next week to interview. Is that still correct?
I believe so.
Okay. Someone needs to, tomorrow, call the candidates and schedule their interviews, and obviously, of course, congratulate them, and then make assignments of when the interviews will take place for each of those finalists. If you could now turn to page 3 in your notebook. These are some procedures that I think would be good for the board to review. As you know, all your interviews must be conducted in an open meeting. During the interview process, only school board members are to ask questions of the finalists. We talked about number 3, using the same questions for each of the applicants or the finalists. This board obviously needs to determine those questions ahead of time. At the end of the process, we think this is a good way to do it, is once the board's met again to discuss each of the interviews, then I think it's a good idea, and it's worked well in other districts, for each board member to write down their top 2, sign the ballot, because you cannot do secret ballots, turn those in to the board secretary to read out loud, and that's how you get to your top candidate that you're going to start negotiating with. If you feel that you need to have someone come back from a second interview, that's totally up to this board. And so those are some procedures we think work well. If you turn to page 5, it's always good. These are some tips for interviewing. I would encourage each board member to review those tips that are on pages 5 through 9. Starting on page 10, there are the Equal Opportunity Employment Guidelines. Please read this before you interview. There's questions that you cannot ask of a candidate, so please review those on pages 10 through 12. Since your interviews are next week, I'm not sure how, Chairman Johnson, that the board has decided to conduct those interviews. We have a sample schedule on page 13. Don't know if you all have the time to do that schedule, but it works well, and it has in other districts. But this schedule, whether you do it all or parts of it, this schedule gives staff and business and community leaders an opportunity to meet and ask questions of the candidate that's not during, obviously they can't do it during the school board interview. And then if you choose to do that process, or even at the actual interview at the board, you can have this candidate reaction form available for people in the audience to complete, so they can provide to the boards, we like candidate 1, that type of thing. It's nothing the board needs to tally, and it's just simply you review them, and that's all that's needed. There's nothing that needs someone to compile the results. It's just for your information only. And that concludes my report.
Thank you.
And I do, for the media, we have a copy for you as well.
Any members have questions for Dr. Grissom while she's here? Questions about the process? Okay. Thank you. We appreciate you. Are there any, we've talked about questions that we would like Mr. Evans to potentially ask.
Well, I have a question about that.
Yep.
So if I can ask whatever you all want me to, I can program a survey to go out tomorrow, just like you've asked, and can have you the results as early as Friday from our parents. But if I ask open-ended questions, you're going to get the encyclopedia. Mm-hmm. So
right.
I would suggest, but it's up to the board, of course, maybe coming up with some things that could be prioritized or categorized. So for example, and this is just an example, If you wanted to ask parents, what are the top 5 things that you think are priorities for the director of schools, and we give them 10 things to choose from, that would give you some data that would be easier to digest so that you can formulate questions.
Okay.
I just worry that if we do open-ended questions, it's going to be too much for you to consume to get anything that's meaningful. It'll all be anecdotal instead of, quantitative.
Right. I agree, and I understand. So members of the board, you've heard the direction that Mr. Evans has given us. If there are questions that you'd like to ask this evening, or are there questions, or would it be acceptable for us to email you questions?
Well, just to be clear, I'm not giving the board direction. I'm just asking for input. I will ask anything you all want me to do, of course. Just tell me what you want me to ask and how you want me to ask it, and I will put it in the form of a survey.
We appreciate that. We don't want to ask open-ended questions.
That's my recommendation, but if you have a better idea,
recommendation.
I'm open to that, of course.
Okay. So members of the board, are there questions you'd like to discuss this evening? Would you like to think about this? Are there questions that parents have reached out to you and asked you to ask? Would it be acceptable, Mr. Evans, if we sent you an email by tomorrow morning?
Yes, as long as I
Any
have about
recommended
I
questions?
think that depending on when you're going to interview your candidates, your finalists, you're going to want to have those results back. I mean, I could let it run through Sunday, for example, and give it to you first thing Monday morning so you can start working on that. You tell me what timeline you want me to follow.
Okay.
And we also have this electronically, so we could probably cut and paste some out of here and send to him. I'm sure there'll be some of the same questions.
So I would ask the board to look through the interview questions that have been provided by TSBA, the sample questions. If there's anything outside of this that you would like Mr. Evans to ask our parents in a survey, now, we've asked for a survey, so if we choose not to do a survey, that's perfectly acceptable as well. So it's really at the direction of the board. If you're not interested in doing that anymore, we don't have to, but I would encourage you to communicate with Mr. Evans by noon tomorrow, any questions that you might have that you'd like to ask our parents.
Is running it through Sunday, does that give you all enough time to digest the results?
Think so?
And the way that our survey system works is there is one limit on it. To ensure that we are getting our parents only, I'll use the school messenger system, which permits one response per household. If they have 10 children, for example, they don't get 10 chances, and the mom and the dad can't have different answers. It's got to be one result per household. That's just the way the system screens it, so that we get a more accurate reflection of our families.
Okay.
That means that husbands and wives have to agree. Good luck. So,
Exactly.
doesn't always happen in my house.
Right. Exactly.
And I've probably said something about this before, but I have a real problem with interviewing the candidates on separate nights, and then it's broadcasted, thus making candidate number 1 the poor person who's number 1, and candidate number 3 gets to hear what candidate number 1 and 2 said. I would like to propose that we do all 3 candidates in one day, one after the other, and that they're sequestered during that time. We'll give you a snack, water, but that way, and let you draw who goes first, who goes second, who goes third. It would make it more fair. I just don't like this one after the other night. So I would rather see them do it.
We handle the faculty interviews and all on another day and do all the candidates on one.
On one day is what I'm suggesting. That's what I'm throwing out to the board, rather than having them do them on 3 separate nights, and that is live streamed, isn't it, John? So I don't see how that's fair.
The sample interview and Ms. Bratton, what page are you on?
I'm on page 13.
The sample interview in your folders is more tailored, it looks like, to somebody who might be coming from out of our system. So the arrive at a hotel, tour of schools and community, meeting with principals and central. So this, although it's a great sample schedule, I don't know that this is exactly what we're going to adhere to.
I would say this would be greatly altered.
Right,
I
absolutely.
just would like to see the board make a decision not to see these people do this on 3 separate nights,
Okay.
so that it becomes fair for all of them.
Okay. Any other comments, suggestions, questions?
I think when we're polling the parents, that we need to ask the question, had you rather see someone from the inside of Rutherford County School System or someone outside of Rutherford County School System? I've had several contact me saying they'd like to see us stay within Rutherford County Schools. So, I'd like to get that feedback from the parents.
Okay.
Mr. Young, you just want a straight up or down, yes or no on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else?
Graduations start next week,
They start Friday.
so we're gonna start,
Friday,
we've got several next
14th.
week, so we only have like one day next week to do this if we're gonna do it next week.
Right. We,
There's nothing scheduled, so we need to,
I'm sorry?
there's nothing on the calendar that I'm aware of that's scheduled unless I missed it.
As far as interviews?
Interview, yes.
Right, so we have to work with the candidates to determine their availability, and then we'll plug in those interviews and we'll notify the board appropriately. Any other comments, questions? Okay, I'd ask that the members of the board please get in touch with Mr. Evans by tomorrow at noon with any questions, not open-ended preferably. And I will work with Ms. Grissom and Ms. Hopkins on a calendar and notifying the candidates. Mr. Reed, is there anything else we need to consider in this meeting?
You may want to consider whether we're going to ask all these questions in the book or a portion of them, and then if people have questions that are not in the book, whether any person has, if you want to allow every board member to present maybe up to 3 additional questions that may be considered to be asked. We've done that previously.
Okay.
So, and then at some point, the board will have to decide what are the questions going to be for the candidates, and that will need to be done before you get to the interviews.
Right.
So that may require another meeting before you get to the interviews to decide what the questions are going to look like.
Did we give the questions to the people who were interviewing last time before the interviews? We did, didn't we? Dr.
I believe
Ash?
we did. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Well, it'll be televised again.
Right.
That's what I thought. I thought that y'all had the questions ahead of time. So we need to make a decision on that.
I think generally we provide the questions ahead of time. The boards have done that previously,
Have always
generally.
let them
Yes.
have those questions ahead of time,
Yes.
except maybe for 1 or 2 that come off the cuff.
And the last time we did this, each board member had 2 questions that they could present to the chairman.
Okay,
And then the chairman compiled those, and then each person was allowed to ask their questions.
okay,
If you want to do that, you can't stick to just the questions in this book.
okay,
You could select among the questions in this book and select the questions you would like to ask.
okay,
But there could be additional questions not in this book that a board member wants to ask.
okay.
So
But that would not be one that we give them.
typically, we've given those in advance as well.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Okay.
They basically have not used this as a gotcha moment.
Right,
And give
more as an
people advancing them.
informational moment, right,
Yes, correct.
which I understand that.
Okay. Do we need to approve these lists of candidates this evening? Does the
You
board
need to
approve?
decide which of the ones you want to proceed with interviews with. So that requires a motion and a second and a vote to decide to proceed with the interviewing however you want to do it. And then that's one step. The second step would be deciding if you want to have another meeting to address questions and decide what kind of, what the questions will be before the interviews.
Okay.
Those are 2 things.
Okay, so the candidates that were brought to us by TSBA, we need to determine this evening whether those are candidates we want to move forward with and
Yes.
for interviews too.
Yes.
Okay.
That would require a motion, second, and a vote, affirmative vote.
Okay. But at any time, this board can go back and add an additional candidate. We can make any adjustments we want throughout this process.
You can change the whole schedule, you can not select any of them, you can add other candidates, you could modify it however you see fit.
Okay. Okay, members of the board. So Mr. Reed has given us direction. He actually did give us direction. Thank you, Mr. Reed. We have 3 candidates that TSBA has vetted and brought to us, and we have paid them to do this. We've asked them to participate with us. Are there additional candidates from what we have been given that you'd like to add? Would you like to trust the process and move forward with the candidates that TSBA has given us? And I'm happy to provide information on the other candidates that were not recommended at some point.
I would definitely like to see the other candidates.
I would like to go ahead and see us for sure interview these 3 people, since these are the ones that came from TSBA and these are the ones that were vetted. I want to make a motion that we do interview the 3 candidates that were suggested by TSBA.
And those 3 candidates are Dr. Anthony, Dr. Ash, and Dr. Sullivan out of our 7 applicants. So we have a motion to start interviewing these 3.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Estes. So we have a motion and a second. Ms. Hopkins, would you please take the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes, thank you, Ms. Hopkins. Okay, members, we'll move forward with these 3 candidates. If anybody would like to look further into the applicants that were not recommended by TSBA, I'd be happy to make that information available to you. I will work with Ms. Hopkins and Ms. Grissom in scheduling interviews, and we will work to hold a meeting in the very near future as we progress. So, is there any other questions, comments, concerns, any other item we'd like to discuss this evening relative to this? Very confusing, lots of information. None of us, or most of us, have not done this before, so we appreciate the patience of everybody as we navigate through this and the direction of TSBA and those who have done it before. So if there is no further business this evening, we will be adjourned.